Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming today to this workshop. We're really going to talk about real examples around edge computing and how edge computing applies to digital transformation. Before we get started, just one quick slide about Stratus, if anybody doesn't know us. Obviously, we have a booth number 29 in the exhibit hall. So after this, if you've got any interest, please feel free to stop by. But we've been in business for nearly 40 years. And our claim to fame as a company is really around building fault-tolerant computers, i.e. computers that don't fail. And these have been applied to a lot of industries. Stratus really got its start in the financial services industry. It's still a big part to us, particularly around transaction processing. So we process a significant proportion of the credit card transaction in the world today. But over the years, Stratus has got into different industries, public safety, transportation, healthcare in some cases. Think any industry where downtime is a bad thing. And really, for the last we've been in the industrial automation space for over 10 years, well over 10 years, but it's really been a focus for us, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, and in the last 2 or 3 years, very much around edge computing, how edge computing can help update, modernize existing SCADA and control systems, and how edge computing is really helping or an integral part of the whole effort around digital transformation. So today we really want to focus on examples. I've got 4 panelists here who very kindly volunteered to help. We've Craig Resnick from ARC. For those of you who don't know Craig, he's been in the automation industry for over 35 years with a whole variety of companies in his early days, people like Siemens and the like, familiar with PLCs, process control, et cetera, et cetera. And he's been an analyst at ARC, I should say, since 1999. I've also got from a partner of ours who are, as they call themselves, a value-added partner, a little bit more towards a system integrator style from Power Resources International. We've got Mike Dombrowski. Mike is a partner in that company, has over 25 years of experience in sales and marketing in and around the industrial automation industry. So he's got a lot of experience that he can bring to bear in this area. And then also Walter Diono. Walter is a principal. He's the director of software at PRI, intimately involved with a lot of the projects that they do. More than 20 years of experience in research and development with a variety of companies. And I think he has a specialization in fluid dynamics. So very much a technical person there. And the last person at the end is Angel Martos. He's the senior manager of terminal automation applications at Buckeye. And is really responsible for helping Buckeye upgrade a lot of their applications, get much more in the way of OEE, transition to edge computers, edge computing applications using our Stratus ZTC product from that perspective. We would like to make this an interactive session. So please, if you have questions, do ask them. Don't be afraid to ask them. I think Amy, wherever she is going to have a microphone. So raise your hand. We'd be happy to try and answer your questions. If we can't, we'll obviously take it offline. But we've got some topic areas we're going to get started with so that everybody will be able to see, and maybe that will trigger some sort of questions that you've got. So first question you may have is, okay, edge computing and digital transformation. What's the relationship between this trend, digital transformation? What's its relationship with this technology, edge computing? And I think, the way that we look at it is digital transformation, as you've really heard here, is about bringing new processes. Those processes interact with people and technology to bring things together. It's really a major driver from what we see at Stratus for IT-OT convergence. It's where a lot of this happens. And those two organizations are brought together. that really breeds the need for new and additional skill sets. And I think you've heard a lot of that on the last IT/OT Convergence panel I was on with Craig. We heard a lot about that as well. But as you do that, you add those additional skill sets, you seek to, in our minds with edge computing, blend traditional automation and control applications with new analytic applications, whether it's data collection, whether it's real-time analytics, whether it's filtering data before sending it to the cloud. That's really a major driver why we see, and the industry talks a lot about edge computing today. And edge computing is clearly something that fits, if you talk to an IT guy, very much outside that data center. I've talked to a lot of IT people there, somewhat concerned about how they're going to manage these edge computing devices. Similarly, OT people now recognizing there are new applications they're going to have to deal with, which are outside their traditional area of expertise. So this really breeds the need for edge platforms, which we believe should be simple, protected, both in a physical way, in a cybersecurity way, and will run autonomously, both from protecting and doing failover of applications. But if there's intermittent connectivity to that device, they will take care of themselves and that they can ultimately be monitored remotely. So one key question that always comes up is, how do you define the edge? What is the edge? And this slide I've taken from some of the work that ARC has done. In fact, it's actually one of Craig's slide. And I think, the answer is the edge is not a single location. It means different things to different people. It depends where you are. So for example, in the OEM space, it could be just a machine, the edge of a machine builder who's now looking to collect new data. It could be a production line, okay, where multiple assets are connected together with a control system, and they're now not only doing the control, but collecting data for some form of analytics, either locally or remotely up in the cloud or the enterprise. Or it could, in fact, be a control room. It's a location outside the data center where you're running an entire plant, for example, or water treatment facility, anything like that. So the edge depends on your perspective, I think, and where you come from in the industry. And there are many kinds of assets, devices that can comprise sort of edge capability when it comes down to it. So again, we've talked a little bit about what you use edge computing for, what you use digital transformation and how it drives change at the edge. And I think, again, it's really all to do with this combining traditional OT capabilities in and around the control space and the automation space with new capabilities that are coming and driven from, quite often, from the IT perspective. All right. Now this again brings into a whole host of capabilities, cybersecurity being the first one that really pops up when we get involved with an opportunity. And the OT people say, yeah, well, we're doing this digital transformation and we kind of need to connect outside. And the first thing is, yes, IT comes in because of cybersecurity. And they're often involved in platform selection, all right, for those edge devices, even though from time to time, the IT people may not have the right capabilities or the right skill sets to go beyond looking at the traditional server and data center applications that they look at. So with that introduction, I'd like to move on and maybe get to some topics and get a discussion going with the panelists and maybe have you ask some of the questions here. So here are three sort of questions to get us started. And for the first one, how do you and your business define digital transformation? So obviously he doesn't have a business, but he works with a lot of businesses. He's an analyst. It's a topic I'm sure he gets lost. So I'm going to turn to you, Craig, first. And how would you define digital transformation?
Well, we look at it as it's really a combination of assets and people and converting the way that they deal with information and how they actually convert into something that is usable to help them operate the business. And we kind of look at it as two phases. One is the digitation process, and I know these are like the tongue twisters between digitation and digitalization. But the digitation process is now we're looking at all manual tasks. We're looking at looking at analog data, and how do we take that, for people that are doing their MES and Excel spreadsheets or their analog gauges, and converting that into some sort of a digital medium that can now be used as part of a work process to either control a plant or provide information to the business systems. And then the next phase in that is you've gone from digitation to digitalization, where now you have converted much of that manual data into something that's digital, but now you're beginning to develop the work processes to best leverage that data. This is where you're using tools like, for example, analytics to be able to do predictive and prescriptive managing of assets to make sure we avoid unscheduled downtime, for example. Or now with IT/OT convergence, how we're able to take a lot of that information and use it to help run the business to be able to identify various KPIs and be able to find out ways that we can better operate the business to increase both the top and the bottom line. So we look at it as really a two-pronged process: digitation and digitalization. And we always find at ARC that people tend to use the words interchangeably. Some people don't even realize there's a difference. Sometimes we'll read an article and they'll use digitation, and sometimes they're doing digitalization and vice versa. So what we try to do is try to qualify it, that there's the first phase, which is let's get that analog information and manual information to something that's digitized. And then then we take the digitized information and be able to run it and help run the business, use it to better leverage the operations of the business.
Okay, so Angel, I know we're kind of on the sharp end of this, all right, from a clear user perspective and sort of in the middle of it. So how do you and your team and your group in Buckeye sort of think about and define?
It's in the same lines of what Greg said. It's being able to take everything that's happening in the field, bring it into a repository in a digital format, serve it up to the end consumer so that they can analyze it and do something with it. I think that's another challenge, because as an end consumer of products, we get a lot of knocks on the door telling us that they can come up with a great way for us to collect all this data, but it's the data scientists behind it and then doing something with that data, which in turn is going to result in projects and expense. So it's gathering all that data, serving it up, whatever it is. You got HSSC, you got operations, all these different disciplines wanting information, putting it in a format where it's creates the appetite to look at it, because sometimes if it's too complicated, they reject it, and then coming up with ways that they can use that data to improve the business.
Okay. Now, Mike and Walter, all right, I know you come from a slightly different industry. We've talked, you're in the transportation space, do a lot with the Transit Authority in New York. So from where you sit, looking at your sort of customer base out there, how do you think your customers sort of think about digital transformation? Is it on their radar? Are they really trying to do it? What's their kind of perspective?
Well, let me change the accent from Craig's Boston accent to my New York accent. My business is in the New York infrastructure. We do a lot of projects with the MTA, the bridges, the tunnels. The way I see it, the digital transformation is a big cultural change. I'm not sure many of the infrastructure people up there, probably same true in Boston, understands what digital transformation is. So I see it, we're trying to, and they're already doing it now, they're at the edge, they're collecting a lot of information, both digital and analog, bringing it into local PLCs, and from there it sits. I'm going to use Walter's analogy that we talked about during lunch about what Steve Jobs predicts is, we know what you need, but you don't know what you need. So our function is to try to help take that edge information and bring it up into a cloud, a local cloud or some other cloud.
Okay. Anything you want to add, Walter?
Yeah, if I can stress a little bit more, it's more the digital transformation. We need a transformation of people. So people are not easy to accept. They're not easy to accept in our field this kind of transformation. They are living in their 20th century comfort zone, and they are it's really hard to move them from the comfort zone. I think you should probably think about your kids. If you look at your kids, what they do in their rooms, what do they do with the games, with video games, or how would they play? You have a glimpse of what the future would be in the office, and that applies to anything, including this business and transportation. However, and it's very difficult to talk with our customers that currently use phones and all the stuff. They're pretty fine for them to accept they can use a smartphone. Is not acceptable. They can also watch what happened to their application online. So that's our mission, actually. It's a kind of a hard mission. It's more than the technology or the process, because if we cannot convince the people to move to this century, it's very hard to do anything. Transformation, digital transformation, and edge computing as well.
So I'm going to come to you next, Angel. So, in terms of the edge and edge computing, obviously you're doing things with it, but amongst your group, your peers at Buckeye, what do you think the understanding of the edge and edge computing and what it can do for people? Do you think it's well understood? Or?
I think within Buckeye, I'm confident to say that the word edge is something new that we're introducing. Right. Specifically, when I, as manager of terminal automation applications, which is more of an OT function, in living in the IT world, they understand server and computer. That's all they understand, right? So, for us, and going back to the diagram you had earlier, when you try to define the edge computer and you said that it means different things for many people. For us, we're using it as a computer to put our supervisory system on top of it. But we are working on a lot of projects for predictive analysis and introducing edge devices to all our systems out there to collect data to do this digital transformation and predictive analysis. But again, edge is new for Buckeye, for the IT folks, but we are in that area of edge computer or just computer, right?
Okay. So Mike, Walter, from your customer base, do you think they have a concept of the edge, or is it something that really hasn't kind of got to them yet? Or
I think the projects that we're submitting, we are at the edge, but the users don't realize they're on the edge.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I can make an example. We have an application that is required. Basically, it's a train alarming system. It's similar to a train control system, but instead the purpose is completely different. So there is a kind of prediction where the train is compared with the signal, the actual signals. The signal can give you wrong information, and from an algorithm I implemented in this application, we can compare if those two information match or not and trigger alarms. And that was a big step forward. Big step forward because they accepted that the data they can get in the field, they can be wrong. And they can be a numerical algorithm actually fixing or at least triggering some alarms. And this is also kind of a predictive type of application. However, that stays where it is. So it doesn't move from the computers. It stays on our Stratus computer locally, and it's very hard to push anywhere else. They watch this 4 monitors, and that's it. So there is no analytic data. We can do that very easily. We can process those data. We can make a statistical analysis, machine learning algorithm, everything. But this is not really. That's the maximum we got.
Okay, I'll come back to that point in a minute. But Craig, let me just finish up with you on this one and maybe lead into the third question. So obviously you see a lot of what's going on out there in the industry, both the vendor side, and on the user side. So what's your perspective on what people think about the edge computing? What they need, how they use it. What kinds of things are they looking to use edge computing for?
Well, it was interesting because really when the edge phenomenon came to light, people were saying, I have all these new low-cost sensors on my assets, but I don't really want to add real estate to my I/O for my PLCs or PACs or DCSs because I'm not doing an on-off or flow level temperature pressure measurement. but I need that information to gather to send up into the production management, business system, even to ERP. So what we're going to do is we're just going to gather that data, right where it's, where the action's occurring, shall we say, and then we're going to share that data with a cloud, and that data will never even go through the control system as you would traditionally through transmitters and photo eyes, proxies, what have you. And that's really when people started thinking of it was really kind of like it coincided with IoT. Then what started to happen is that people were saying, do I really want to take that raw data, send it up to the cloud? Maybe I'm cloud adverse, or I don't feel as though that I need to keep that everything local right next to the process. Maybe I'm worried about real time or latency. And then what I want to do is do the appropriate analytics and other computing at the site. So now you've evolved from edge to edge computing, because now all of a sudden you're keeping that data right where and processing that data locally. And as you know, it sounds like from some of your customers, they don't want to share it with the cloud. They want to keep it contained. So that's kind of like how we draw the line is if you're using data from, again, IoT, low-cost sensors to share with a cloud, then it's really just that's at the edge. But if you want to kind of run that data, run the right analytics and convert it into something where you can take a meaningful action at the site, then that's really edge computing.
Yeah. So Walter, just coming back to your point about, the sort of case study you told where all the data is sort of kept locally. Do you think that why is it that they're keeping it locally? Is it because they just don't see the need to change it? They'd like to do something, they don't know what to do, they're scared?
No, I think that they're most likely they don't want to exit from the 20th century comfort zone. That's the reasons to me, because it's very simple now that we have all technology to ensure that with cybersecurity, all this kind of process. However, the problem is that their department that is working with this application that we did, and the IT departments, they don't talk to each other. So they are conflicting each other. They don't have a very good relationship. They are all these kind of things. They are really affecting the evolution of those applications. Besides that, there is a part of this project is a playback system. The playback system gets the data that were run in a certain times lab, and then you can rerun this data to see what action that were taken, what happened. They wanted to take those data out of the system because the manager, they cannot access the system anyway. And they want to show this data organized in a video somewhere else. It's difficult. How can you make a video of thousands and thousands of data and days of running and bring it on a USB and go somewhere and push in a computer? What graphics can run that? You need the same program that generated data to run those data. So that is an example, a perfect example that if you can connect it to the playback system, you can show this data anywhere. And there is no problem in the sense that playback system is isolated from the other one, but it's difficult to push forward this kind of
Okay, so before I move on, are there any questions from anybody on the floor? Anybody got a question that? No? Yes? No? Okay, well, we'll move on. If you think of anything, please don't be afraid to raise your hand. We'd be happy to try and sort of answer it here. So, with that sort of basic sort of definition that's kind of out there, one of the issues that we've come across consistently, and you hear Walter talk about this, you hear Angel talk about it, and Craig as well, is, we hear people say, oh, well, we want to engage in digital transformation. We've got a lot of things that we want to do. All right. And I think from our perspective is, well, do you really know where you are at the moment? And does what you're trying to do make sense? And we find, for a lot of our customer base who are, smaller, medium-sized companies, not necessarily major corporations like Buckeye, all right, they really don't. And they're struggling to figure out how they can actually do this, what they're scared of, what they really need to do. So one of the things that we've developed is a simple maturity model, All right, and this is a sort of cut down version. One of the things we've left on your table is something that's got a fair amount more detail that goes with it, but it doesn't show up as well. And as you've heard at the conference and people have said here, it's a combination of people, processes, and technology. And from our perspective, if you don't have alignment of all three of those things to understand what you can do today, it's very hard to move on to the next stage where you may get better or more insightful results. So, the thing we're concentrating on here today are these three middle ones with this 5 eyes model: informed, insightful, and intelligent. There may be some of you out there who come from companies that have got isolated assets, stranded assets. We hear that talked about all the time. But most people that we deal with these days are in this informed stage where they've got maybe a single site, multiple assets tied together. Maybe they're starting to think about using a hierarchical historian, for example, in terms of that. But it's really still a very, very manual kind of process that's there. It's just focused around the plant. It's got OT people. This is what OT people know and love very well. And we kind of call this Edge 1.0. I mean, I think the analogy that Walter just shared very much fits into that category. A lot of people now are looking to move to that insightful stage. And I think this is where, a lot of what we hear talked about at the conference starts to come into play. This is where you're trying to take data, move it up to the enterprise, all right, in terms of that. The skill sets become more important with this convergence of OT needs IT help. So for us, the first thing that happens, somebody comes and says, yep, we talk to the OT folks, they like the technology that we have, they see the benefit of it, but we have to go to IT and get approval, whether it's cybersecurity, networking, whatever it happens to be. If you were in the IT/OT panel earlier, Angel was talking very, very much about this. So it's new skill sets that need to be either brought in, skill sets that existing people need to learn. And again, there's an increased level of integration, there's an increased level of asset collection, and you're starting to move towards a more predictive kind of environment. This is Edge 2.0, and if any of you have read Craig's key technology trends for 2020, he talks about sort of Edge 2.0. And I guess we'd say that's probably where the action sort of is today. But I think for full digital transformation, full use of edge computing, it's that next stage where you really start to leverage in a significant way machine learning capabilities and full integration from the cloud right the way down through the enterprise, to the control room, to the edge, that you start to get really interesting things happening. And obviously, some companies are doing that. You hear about that at the conference today as well. But it's a journey for people, all right? And we've seen people start to do this and fail because they don't have that alignment of people, process, and technology. So again, this is something that we've developed as a tool to help ourselves and potentially help our customers figure out where they are in this journey and do they have weaknesses that they need to address before they can move forward. So with that, I come back to the panel again with a few more questions, maybe in the context of that sort of model. And Angel, let me go to you first, because I know you've lived through this,
Yes.
right? And we've talked about it. So what are some of the biggest challenges you've had in sort of embarking on this digital transformation journey, and kind of what kinds of capabilities do you need out of the edge computing capabilities you've got today, and are you thinking about the future as well?
Yeah, I go back to a colleague of mine once told me that three of the most challenging things I'll encounter is people, technology, and change. And people have to accept change, and technology is developed by people. So the biggest challenge you're going to have is people.
Yeah, exactly.
That was my challenge. It was to serve up the information to all of these disciplines, from field operations to client technologies to security, and make sure that they were part of the decision-making factor, that it wasn't my decision, that they all collaborated, and that from a security standpoint, they felt that we were secure. And from a network standpoint, that we were on the right traffic, right? from a client technologies that we weren't encroaching into their areas. So that was the biggest challenge is it's working with people and creating a common goal that would help us. That was, to me, my biggest challenge.
Okay. So Craig, you know, as you look out there to your clients and people in the industry, sort of what are the challenges that you see? You know, what are they, you know, talking about and thinking about when it comes to sort of edge computing needs and capabilities?
Well, I think the thing is that from a capability perspective, it all goes to really what their philosophy is as far as it's kind of like a cloud, hybrid cloud or no cloud philosophy. So it really depends upon whether how important it is to them to whether they need that data to be local and never go anyplace else, or the processing to be local and then shared up to the, for example, in a cloud, maybe for applications like historian data, where they feel as though they don't need to access it right away and in real time is not an issue. Or it's an issue, or they just feel as though that the cloud is completely secure, so there's really no issue as far as with getting, you know, leveraging the capabilities of the cloud as well as the edge. So that's what we see. But certainly, Angel, to your point with people, we sometimes will have cases where, you know, where companies are going through this whole digital transformation process, and we've had people say, you know, I got 3 years left, okay? If I engage in digital transformation and it works, someone's going to pat me on the back and say, good job. If it fails, I'm gone. It's a career-ending move. Mm-hmm. So what's my choice? I can do nothing and be with no potential risk, or I can do something with slight reward but massive risk. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we really try to advise the clients is you really have to, as part of the culture, is to there has to be an incentive to change and take away as much of the risk or failure that this is like a terminal position. Because in many cases, it's like, yeah, we really want to progress, we want to move forward, but if you make a mistake and you cost me any unscheduled downtime, you're done. So you're putting the person in a box to the point of what can they do, and in many cases, we find that paralyzes a lot of organizations from making these changes. Secondly, also from the cultural side, is at ARC, when we were going through a lot of the IT/OT convergence discussions with customers, and they each wanted to learn about each other's domain. But in the beginning, we couldn't put people from the same company on IT and the same company in OT in the same room, because it'd be like a civil war. We could take them, if they were from competitors, we could take company A competes with company B. We could take company A's IT with company's B OT and put them in a room, and it was great because they didn't see the politics. And that was the thing, is that who's gonna win the battle, who's gonna get the domain, who's gonna survive, who's not gonna survive, and it really became an issue that I don't wanna deal with IT or I don't wanna deal with OT because someone's gonna lose. The company's not doing this to add bodies, they're doing this to consolidate bodies. So who's gonna win and who's gonna lose? And the company needs to establish that this is not a case of winner and loser. This is a case that, and putting together for even career paths of how these people can go ahead and succeed in this newly converged world.
So Mike, Walter, you know, what's your perspective, and certainly based on some of the things that Craig just said, right?
It's basically the same thing. When you deal with large infrastructure agencies in all the cities, you pick one particular agency, there's silos between engineering groups. There's silos in networking people, there's silos in the power people, there's silos in the signal people, and nobody wants to share that information with one another. And even if they wanted to share the information up to some point where some overall management can see everything happening, say on a railroad, from power to where the trains are to networking, they're all suspect as far as putting in any information out on any cloud. So the thought is to possibly put a local cloud where they have control of it and not the entire world.
Right.
I can just tell a little, very, very quick, a little story. I talking with one of the managers in one of the railroads. He said, listen, I have a very hard time to find people that want to work here, new people, kids, young graduates from school. They come here, You select them, they're excellent, they stay here, and the moment they understand they cannot use internet here, it's just you don't have running water at home, they leave. And they have a lot of opportunities, of course. So it's not a matter of, I understand perfectly the person that has his career on stake, but his technology moves away, he finds his own way to move forward, regardless of the people they are behind. Either they can choose, okay, we become a museum, or we move forward and we provide service to the people.
So let's just move on and talk a little bit about the characteristics of an edge computing platform. And again, I'll come to you first, I think, Angel. So we take those last two sort of questions there. You know, what problems were you looking for edge computing to solve for you, and what characteristics, you know, are important to you in your selection of edge computing platforms?
In our application, of course, being a terminal supervisory system, we needed something that wasn't a PC. We needed something that had less moving parts, solid-state drives, no fans. We needed something that was solid, something that was standard. Not just going to the market and say, okay, here's the new version of a box, let's do all the testing, and end up with 4, 5, 6 flavors when you have 114 terminals. So that's what we were looking for. The other one is the software side of it. With your hypervisor solution, that was a huge plus for us, because now, you know, it's we don't have to fight the CPU or the BIOS or the kernel. We just put it on the hypervisor. And then the last thing, you know, I know we're talking about edge computing as a service, and I know I keep boasting a lot about the service that Stratus has given us, but you guys check the box and deliver, especially on the cybersecurity. We hit you hard with cybersecurity, and you turned around and resolved that issue very quick. So that's something what we were looking for, and you checked all the boxes.
Okay. So Mike, Walter, you know, okay, you say your customers don't really have the concept of the edge, but do you think they understand the value that they've got from the systems that you put in for them? You know, what are some of the sort of key characteristics around those systems?
Okay.
So some of the value that we see as far as providing a stable edge systems, back in 2013, we were competing with a couple of major SCADA companies in the US. And it was like David versus Goliath. We're a $30 million company. We were competing against a $1 billion company. We needed to come up with something stable that I would consider our edge. And we picked the Stratus fault tolerant, redundant system instead of just offering plain old computers with redundancy built into it and networked together. So that was our competitive advantage, to offer a reliable system that was fault tolerant and redundant, and it was accepted, and that's what won us the first of several systems similar to that using the Stratus computers.
Definitely, yes. That the solution is solid, and we use Linux operating system on most of our applications, and or ESXi virtualization, and they're solid. We don't have any issues with the computers. However, we would like to use Stratus services, remote maintenance, and once again, we find problems because they don't allow us to use that. Even though they understand the value of this, but they can't.
Right.
I say they can't.
So Craig, you know, when people are looking at deploying edge computing systems out there, what are some of the sort of factors that you see them sort of thinking about, or maybe factors they should be thinking about that they're not, in terms of that?
Well, I think what happens is that they don't really, initially what they're doing is it really became as I said, it was first an IoT discussion. It really was kind of like when people would say, how do I jump on the IoT bandwagon? The first thing they would say is edge, and they would think, oh, that's great, now I have access to all this data. But they still are trying to understand and grapple with a lot of the concepts, like certainly like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I think there's so much data that's being collected that could be used now to develop enough history and be able to come up with a lot of scenario analysis that people can now, it's how do they leverage that data to do a better job running their processes based on the data that they've been collecting with, in the past, it was all, sitting in an OSI soft historian, for example. And this is a case where how do we now take advantage of all this data that we never had access to and now do a better job of really optimizing our processes by having this? I mean, certainly when we're in the, in the process control industry, they're thinking still more in terms of closed loop, PID, but they're not really thinking in terms of now you do this in combination with all these access to all these new sensing devices, especially really in the area of asset management, because if their biggest problem in the plant is always how do we eliminate or at least minimize any possible unscheduled downtime, there's no better tool to be able to monitor your assets, be able to run the right analytics to make predictive or prescriptive analytics to tell people what is going to happen in their process in the future, so they can now, instead of an unscheduled downtime, plan a maintenance downtime to upgrade assets, for example. And I think that's probably the biggest opportunity, is to use the edge to minimize or eliminate unscheduled downtime by gathering data that they did not have access to, process it correctly, make the right predictions, and be able to make sure that the spare parts are going to arrive before the product fails. The maintenance people have been scheduled, especially if you're doing remote monitoring. And I think that's really where the great opportunity is to use this as a tool to minimize or eliminate unscheduled downtime.
Okay, great. So just to finish up here in the last few minutes we've got, one of the things we've done at Stratus is go out and survey the marketplace, primarily the OT side of things, about what their views are on edge computing. So in conjunction with CFE Media, we've produced an edge trend report. It's freely available to anybody who's interested in it. There's just a lot more detail behind it, but here's a couple of key things that came out of that report. I think the one thing that really stands out is people are looking for education.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of what we're trying to provide people these days, is understanding what edge computing can do, how they can use it, things they might want to think about as they move forward with their digital transformation implementations, or maybe just upgrading their existing control systems. So just to summarize a couple of things here, what are the main sort of applications for edge computing that are out there today? And you've heard the panel talk about this today. Obviously, control system consolidation, modernization. There's still a lot of that going on. In terms of that, it may be in preparation for embarking on a digital transformation initiative. Real-time control and analytics. So we're starting to see people use this data that has been sitting there or has been lost in many cases to some real-time analytics down towards plant floor type of environments, whether it's in compression stations for natural gas pipelines, water wastewater treatment plants, on machines, OEM machine builders starting to do this kind of capability. And again, as I said, all preparing to run a combination of OT and IT applications on the same edge platform so that they can enhance their business processes, and do more intelligent things, make more intelligent decisions when it comes down to it. So what are the key problems that edge computing can really address? And I've talked to a lot of people who've had these problems in one form or another. Latency, all right? Doing analytics locally versus sending it up to an enterprise, and the round trip delay means that by the time the data gets back, it's really not of value to you anymore. Autonomy. A lot of remote locations out there where connectivity is intermittent at best. All there are low bandwidth applications where there isn't much connectivity, whatever it happens to be. Bandwidth costs. So, I remember the early days coming here 3 or 4 years ago, and it was all great. We're going to put sensors on everything. We're going to send it straight up to the cloud. Life will be wonderful. That works pretty well in a pilot environment. Can get very, very expensive very quickly when you start to scale it out. This always assumes that you can get that connectivity. in some of these locations. So edge computing is a consolidation point, filtering data, only sending up what's necessary to run those machine learning applications. Last one is privacy and security. So privacy and security are obvious from locking down the box and whatever else, but the thing I think we have to remember is data privacy laws coming into play, particularly if you're a global company or you operate across borders. It may not be legally possible to send that data where you want to send it. Not something I think that, you know, we in the OT world really think about that, but certainly it's something that's got the attention of the IT folks. So, you know, if you take all these things that are coming into play, there's a definite role for edge computing, and these are the kinds of things that we're seeing sort of people want to use today. So really, you know, when it comes to edge computing, what is it that people are looking for? Whether they're OT people or IT people. And it really boils down to three things. It's the applications, it's what you do with the data that's important. But you need to be able to collect that data, you know, protect it locally, make sure you don't lose it. Those systems out there, you're not going to be able to go running out if something's wrong or looks like it's wrong. So they really need to be simple to operate, maintain, install, so that maybe technicians who are going out into the field can do this. And obviously they need to be able to run autonomously out there, take care of themselves, have integrated redundancy capabilities, if that's what you decide that you need, that are very simple to use and operate. You know, they need to be able to run if they're disconnected from there, and they need to be able to be managed remotely. So in our minds at Stratus, what we focus on are delivering edge computing systems that are simple, protected, and autonomous. With that, I'd like to draw it to a close. Thank our panelists. Somebody has a question at the back. Okay. I guess we've got time for one question quickly.
Thank you, panel. This is a question for Angel. Now that you have your edge compute capabilities deployed, has it changed what you do with your PLC, your DCS equipment, or your terminal automation systems?
It has. It's changes that are coming. As part of introducing the Stratus computer to Buckeye, it opened up the door to IT to embrace OT. This year, I've been given an opportunity to embrace those level 2 devices such as PLCs and OmniFlow computers. We're bringing those into the family. We're going to manage those. So those are the things that we've gotten from introducing Stratus into Buckeye. So there's another win for Buckeye by joining forces with Stratus. Did I answer your question?
So it sounds like you've added control equipment given the edge compute infrastructure, if I understand your answer correctly.
We've added the management of it. We're managing that. We're bringing it into the IT family, bringing OT technology under the IT umbrella through the operational applications group. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, with that, I'd really like to thank all our panelists today for their insights. I hope you found this useful, and please feel free to stop by the Stratus booth. So thank you, guys. Great job.